Mike, astrology is one of those sciences that some individuals are completely against, and some individuals just believe it as if it always existed.
Mm-hmm. And there is a science to it.
Yes.
And it's a very deep subject.
Well,
It's not just whatever somebody writes in the newspaper.
That's true. Today we have an individual that practices astrology, but not in necessarily the traditional sense. She incorporates psychology. She incorporates the individual's personality, and it's a great pleasure to have Patti Post. She's a astrological coach. And Patti, we want to welcome you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Great to be here from this corner of the world.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that you live in the Netherlands.
That's right. Yeah.
But you're a world traveler.
Yes, well, you kind of have to. If you are born in the Netherlands, you are quite easily a world traveler because our country is so tiny.
I understand. So tell us about yourself.
Yes, well, so my name is Patti, and I'm a Netherlands-based astrological coach, and I haven't always been. I was in business, in corporate life for over 25 years in all these respectable roles as program manager, project manager, trainer, coach, HR manager. And all over a sudden, for some people at least, it seemed, I quit my job and started my practice in astrology. And to be honest, I had been a shadow astrologer for more than 10 years. But it was always quite hard. I'm not sure. I think it's even more accepted in the US. But here in the Netherlands, which is very down-to-earth country, astrology is weird. I mean, you introducing this subject and in the same sentence using astrology is a science is already almost like cursing in the church is a Dutch proverb. Yeah. So and that has been quite a journey for me, being caught by astrology so many years ago, and keeping it more in the underground, so non-mainstream. Because I remember at the time I studied astrology, I was working for Philips. You probably know the company. And I was telling my boss, well, I'm studying astrology. And he looked at me and he said, what? Astrology? Do you believe that nonsense? And that hurt me. So I went underground with this practice. And only 10 years after, I dared to kind of get myself out of the closet and become this astrological coach. And of course, using all my business experience in my coaching on a daily basis. But
when you were personnel manager or working in HR, did you you had access to people's birthdays? Did you see evidence, or well, that person's not going to work well with that person, or knowing how these people are?
Yes, well, that's always an interesting subject, because whenever I meet people and I interact with them, and lots of times I get this question: okay, can you guess my sun sign? and of course I try not to indulge in that game. Because first of all, you are not only your sun sign, you're so much more. For me, astrology is really an ode to human diversity. So just calling you a typical Taurus or a typical Gemini would be too narrow for me. But yes, there is always this little voice in my head who, of course, based on the birth date, can at least give some indication of the developmental path for this particular individual. So, and I remember being an HR manager, having access to all these tools that you probably heard of as well. You had DISC and MBTI and the Enneagrams. So many tools are being used for personnel selection. And I would always think, if I could only take a look at their birth chart, I could tell you so much more.
Yeah.
Because using these tools, these assessment tools, it is still a bit too narrow. And of course, in the basics, astrology is a model as well. It's such a unique model because nobody's birth chart is the same. We all have different birth charts. So, and that makes it very hard to put a statistical analysis on birth charts because they're all different. But yes, to come back to your question, indeed, I could see it, but I wanted to know more.
Yeah.
And that's why I actually quit. Yes.
Now, have you done anything with the Chinese astrology? Because I have a book that kind of marries both the Chinese and the Western. So, I would be a Pisces dragon.
Yeah.
So the dragon's more fiery, and the Pisces more like kind of laid back and quiet.
Yeah, well, there's so many different forms of astrology, and what I find always so fascinating is they all seem to work somehow. So basically, it serves people to look at these different modalities. For me, one of my own personal really desires is to be extremely good at something, and I have narrowed my view to only evolutionary astrology because to me that already contains so much detail and so much metaphors that I would confuse myself and my clients using also other forms of astrology. But yes, they are great and they work, and other people are drawn to those kinds of astrology, and but no, I have not married the two.
Okay.
I'm not sure what I am.
What's
actually.
evolutionary
I think
astrology?
I'm a rooster. I think I'm a rooster.
Okay.
I'm from '69, so.
So what is evolutionary astrology compared to whatever other types there are?
Yes, well, what you see, especially here in the Netherlands and the Benelux and the countries around us, we use a lot of psychological astrology. And basically, we owe quite a bit to Carl Jung in that form of astrology because he was actually an astrologer, Carl Jung, and he used astrology to, diagnose his patients. So we owe him a lot. What I found, though, is that this kind of astrology was a bit too flat for me. It contained a lot of information on talents and personality, but what I missed was the movement of people always being in development. I am not the same person as yesterday, and in 2 years I'll be totally different. So if I just have a flat description of who I am, that would not serve my consciousness, actually. So I was looking for the magic key, and I found that in evolutionary astrology, which is based on the premise that you are an evolving being, and making visible the road, making visible the path, and all the clues of the path towards, like a fulfilling and happy life. So, and it fitted me so well because I've always been in learning and development, leadership development. I wanted to only talk about how can you take the next step, and not look back and only describe you as a flat human being. And I do not want to say anything about other kinds of astrology. Astrology works for me the best.
So when you work with individuals, it's my understanding you work online, you work face-to-face, you work using different Zoom materials. Do you work as groups or individuals? What services do you provide to potential customers?
Yes, well, it's basically it is two-faced almost. Because yes, I work in my day-to-day practice. I work with mostly coaches, and that's an interesting group of people.
You mean sports people?
Because coaches and entrepreneurs. And why coaches are so interesting for me is because they have learned so many techniques and modalities themselves. They are not so very coachable. And I hold a framework that they do not have. So it basically enables them to open up for coaching and be coachable. So that's why that at least is my explanation of so many coaches finding their way to me. But it's coaches, it's entrepreneurs, it's really people that take their personal leadership, not depending on me to give them the answers on how to live their life, but really talk about things like meaning and spirituality, which is for me meaning in a very broad sense. So that is in my individual work. But as you can see, and I have a very fiery energy, I also love to just give this knowledge away to people. So that's why I also started my own academy, Stargazer Academy, where I have online training, but also workshops, masterclasses on this kind of astrology, really trying to inspire people to either become an astrologer or at least let themselves be inspired by the metaphors of astrology. So it's kind of two ways. And I also had a big desire to give away a lot of my knowledge, and that's why I started a YouTube channel and I have a Facebook page. So far, it's mostly Dutch, giving away as much of my knowledge as I can. So that is what I do. But my core business is working with individuals, taking the next step in their life, discovering their unique development path. And also, I'm not an ordinary astrologer just doing one reading. I always work longer with people in coaching programs. So that's what I do on a daily basis.
So do you start with the birth chart? You know, do you have to know like where they were born, what time, and all that kind of stuff, and then you go from there?
Yes, what I do is I start, the first session is always a big monologue from my side, I have to say, giving in a 2-hour session, really looking at that birth chart. And I always say, I borrow you my eyes. I let you look at yourself through my eyes. And I do not have all the voices in my head. Is it okay? What does my mother think? I don't have all those voices in my head. So I have a broad, unlimited view from the metaphor of the astrology to look at themselves. And that is always a magical session for people because they find so much confirmation, but also being able to claim whatever they already felt they were. And then afterwards, we are going to work in different coaching sessions. Then it's not a monologue anymore, but then I use different coaching techniques to actually dive deeper with people and really let them make this step. Because you can come here, hear a great story from me for 2 hours and walk out the door and just forget about it. It's hard for people to actually put insight into action. So, and that's what I help people with.
You know, there's a lot of different astrological readers on the internet. You can get your monthly, you can get your weekly. You know, Mike was also saying about on the newspapers, you can open it up and you can see, you know, based on
like
the
two sentences of something.
Yeah. The different style that you have and that you enjoy and that you work with the other individuals, etc. How is that a little bit different than just some of the ones that are on like YouTube?
Yeah. This is the kind of astrology that you read when you are at the dentist,
yes.
Reading in the glossy magazines. And actually, when I started out with astrology, I was studying with this great woman, Karen Hamaker. She's really very famous worldwide as well. And she was telling me that she was doing some work for, I think, this glossy magazine. And basically what happens there is that who will make up the astrology for this week? That would be the question. So a lot of times it's made up. Sometimes it's really put in by a real astrologer, but it's so broad, it's so generic. generic. I mean, Libra, oh, you're going to meet a very interesting man. I mean, 1/12 of the people is born under the sign of Libra, so that would be very strange. And that's why, and I have to explain myself quite a bit about this very subject, because people always say, oh, that's nonsense. And I would say it's just too broad to actually really touch somebody's heart. These kind of horoscopes. And also in psychology we have, it's called the Barnum effect. And the Barnum effect is an effect, people recognize themselves in generic descriptions, and they actually tested, or this hypothesis of the Barnum effect on horoscopes, switching the particular characteristics of the different signs and mixing them up, and people would say, oh yeah, that's me. And so I have a hard time always explaining myself about this kind of astrology. And I actually also have a bachelor in psychology, and I'm studying for my master even. Every single book I open about personality, psychology, whatever, there is always the example of astrology used as being, kind of a quasi science. So,
are they at odds, psychology and astrology? Are they at odds, or, pointing out like those people are crazy, or?
For me, they are brilliant together. They
Okay.
are brilliant together, but it's very narrow in these books. And for me, I find it such an interesting subject, because what I want to do is marrying the two. So marrying science and astrology, to me, that's also a science. But if you look at psychology is really about how do people look. So what do you see about perception, for instance? Metaphysics, which my kind of astrology is more about what is looking. What is looking, and where is that? I don't know the answer, and but it contains a almost magical layer, which I always find when I work with clients, that if I approach people in these from both angles, they are touched. And they are appreciated for their smartness, but they are also touched in the heart by the metaphysical idea of I'm a part of a greater field. So for me, they work together perfect. But of course, if I take my class, psychology class, I learned to not say that I am an astrologer, because I always get into all these difficult conversations, which is fine, but I'm there to study psychology.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there was one thing that happened lately. There was, I don't know if you remember, the kid that was wearing the red hat at the Lincoln Memorial that had a interaction with an Indian.
Oh, I'm not sure about that.
Okay,
No.
well, it was interesting.
It
It was interesting to see how people interpret it, because nobody said anything. And when, yes, this person versus that person, this person, they saw a different story, and they were projecting their own feelings, or if they knew a kid that looked like that, then they projected their past into it. So it was just kind of interesting to see how people reacted to that.
Absolutely.
In a psychological way,
And I think I feel it as part of my duty to always keep this aspect of free will and ways to integrate this knowledge. I never claim I speak the truth. I aim for finding people, finding their own truths, using some different kind of information from a different field to see, okay, how does this fit me, and being the best version of me in my own circle of in my own circle of influence. And so I never claim to speak the absolute truth. I think I should stop if I do that.
But Patti, I'm just curious, would you consider yourself to be an empath, where you can pick up the feelings of other individuals?
I think doing this kind of work, whatever, if you're an ordinary psychologist or an astrologer, I think empathy is a very important part to be able to connect to people. So and I have learned to really use this to enrich the kind of information that I see already in the birth chart, but never allowing myself to get carried away
Sure.
by the other person, because otherwise I'm telling a story that could be like socially accepted. I really want to stay on the truth path, and trying to connect to people, really being very empathic, but then still trying to go a little out of the comfort zone to really make this person realize something and taking a next step. But I think empathy is a huge part of this work. Yes.
Do you see people are surrounded by colors?
No, I actually do not see aura. So no, that would be a short answer to that. I think I see some, but I wouldn't consider myself seeing colors, and I'm actually happy for it, because it makes me be I can focus on my my modality, which is the evolutionary astrology, and I don't get distracted with different kind of inputs. But of course, I'm like everybody else. I am a magical mix of everything. I get the intuition. I have knowledge. I'm using my brain. I'm using my heart. I'm using my soul. I'm using everything in this kind of work. And my language is astrology.
So when you say, you've said several times about people come to you and you tell them a story, what kind of story would that be? Do you see things in the chart that, okay, about the age of 32, you had an upsetting time, or at this time this was a very good time? And do you go through the timeline like this, or what's the story that you would tell someone?
For an initial session, it would be, what I have found is to really reach people and make them connect to themselves on a deeper level. It always helps to tell stories using metaphors. And of course, astrology is a metaphor. So what I do is I tell stories about, for instance, I am a Sagittarius, and I tell a person the story of what are you aiming for in this life? What is the path of a Sagittarius? And I always use stories, make up stories, stories that I have from my own life to connect to this person, and because then I can reach a layer that goes beyond the mind. And it's not about being a fortune teller and saying, oh, I can see at the age of 32. No, I can see, okay, there was a very specific developmental area highlighted at that time. What actually happened, I cannot see that. I don't want to see. What I can see is, okay, this was a theme that was active for you, and it could be the theme of death, but we can have all kinds of death of the ego, death of people. It's a transformation from the inside. It's sometimes even about money. It's not up to me to fill in those details. But it's using the entrance of the metaphor to get people to go down from the mind more to the heart, integrating the two.
But different planets and things tell you what kind of area in the life that it is talking about, right?
Exactly. Yes. And what you said about the 32 years old, what you can do, of course, my first session is always about laying down the whole palette of the personality and all the drives and longings of this person, and how to get it right in this lifetime. And in a later session, what I always do is look at, okay, and what are these themes that are going to be highlighted for you? And some are very generic because they go hand in hand with developmental psychology stages that we have, like great people like Erickson gave us the developmental stages in our lives. They go kind of hand in hand and very generic at certain ages. And then, of course, very specific based on your actual time of birth.
What kind of aha moments have you had? Or
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
what kind of aha moments have you had? You know, you telling somebody like, "Oh, okay, now that makes sense," or
Oh, for myself or for my clients?
for the clients.
I don't want to be presumptuous, but that happens every time. Yes.
Okay, cool.
And not speaking from ego, but just speaking from connection and people really connecting dots. And it's never about very new information. I mean, people have lived this life; they are themselves, so it's not new. Hopefully, what I tell them. But what I can do is put it on a different in a different framework, so it's a different way of understanding themselves. But the aha moment is always there, which makes it very magical. And it's not my goal to have this great aha moment with my client. My goal is, okay, and how does this serve you?
Yeah, it puts everything into a context that makes the story mean something to them, to where
Yes.
they see that there's a path or something, that it's not just
Yeah.
randomness.
No, it's not random, and also it's not only speaking about that path, but also some of the patterns that are already installed at birth. This kind of astrology, it's called evolutionary astrology, basically presuming that we live more lives. Yeah, the concept of reincarnation. And of course, looking at the Buddhists, well, of course they believe in reincarnation because the Dalai Lama is the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. But and for me, that is a concept that I cannot prove, but it feels right. And for me, it's like, okay, so, and I'm a Sagittarius, so I'm always searching for meaning. And for me, living more lives, energy can never go away, just change state, change form. A physical notion that is, I think, very true. It's also like, okay, I live this life, I have all these lessons, I learn all these things, and then I die. What is the point of my life if that is the end? So I don't not only believe this, but I also want to believe, and it gives meaning to people. And of course, my clients, and I get very many very rational, analytical people here, usually high up also in corporations. And sometimes people don't feel very much with that idea of reincarnation. And then you could say, oh, okay, but you can also see this as a family pattern, something that is inherited in the family, and that is kind of passed on. And now you are ready to break this pattern. And this kind of astrology gives you such great indications of how you can do that.
Patti,
yeah.
we're running out of time. How can people get in touch with you?
Yes, well, I'm presuming that most people watching this are speaking English. So my website is pattipost.nl. And if you put a slash and then en, that's the English version of my website. I'm going to make that a bit bigger because mainly it's in Dutch, but en is my English
And also on the website, you can press English too. And it will convert. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, so that's Patti.post.nl.
Yes.
Okay.
/en. Yeah.
/en.
And there it's also English.
Okay. Yeah. All right. And you're available for online consultation. You're available for face-to-face, and you work with groups, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
As well. And I work in companies as well. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I hope that we can speak with you again. Mike, fascinating lady.
Mm-hmm. So, until next time, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next show.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much. And see you next time.